The evening light over the hills had turned the color of old brass, and long wooden tables sat draped in white linen between rows of vines heavy with fruit. Josephine Farrow stood at the edge of the gravel path in a pale green dress, watching her husband climb out of their 15-year-old truck in a jacket with a tear along the left elbow, patched twice with mismatched thread. "You could have worn the navy one," she said quietly, not quite meeting his eyes. Elias Thorncroft looked down at his sleeve, as if noticing the tear for the first time, though he had noticed it that morning and chosen it anyway. "This one's comfortable," he said. "Besides, it's just dinner." It was not just dinner. It was the Wyndham and Cole partners' dinner. The night Josie had been waiting 3 years for. The night the firm would announce its newest class of partners. And her name, she had been quietly assured, was near the top of the list. She smoothed the front of her dress and did not argue further. There was no time, and there was no version of tonight where arguing about a jacket would end well. They walked together up the gravel path toward the long tables set among the vines, past a wrought iron gate and a sign that read, in simple carved letters, Thorncroft Hill Vineyard. Josie had barely glanced at it on the drive-in. She'd been rehearsing what she'd say if Mr. Wyndham asked her to speak. At the head table, under strings of warm lights, sat the senior partners of the firm's silver-haired men and women in tailored linen, sipping something pale gold from wide glasses. Josie's colleague Trent Ashbrook, junior partner and permanent fixture at every firm function, spotted them first and raised an eyebrow at Elias's sleeve. "Rough year for the laundry?" Trent said, loud enough for the two women beside him to hear. They laughed, not unkindly. Exactly, but not kindly either. The laugh of people who assumed they were safe to laugh. Josie felt her face go warm. "It's just a jacket, Trent." Sure. Trent lifted his glass toward Elias. "What do you do again?" "Remind me." "I work with my hands," Elias said simply, and reached for the breadbasket. "Course you do," Trent said, and turned back to his conversation, already bored. Josie sat down beside her husband and did not look at him. She loved him, had loved him for 11 years, through 2 apartments, and 1 small house, and every version of himself he had ever shown her. But there were nights, and this was one of them, when she wished he cared even a little about what people thought. He never explained himself. He never dressed for a room. He simply arrived as he was, and let the room decide what to make of him. The dinner rolled forward the way these dinners always did. Appetizers of burrata and heirloom tomatoes, a slow procession of wine poured by servers in black aprons, conversation that circled billable hours and case wins and which associate had made a fool of themselves in front of a judge that spring. Elias said little. He ate quietly, complimented the bread, and once, when a server refilled his water glass, thanked her by name Marisol, which made the woman pause and smile in a way that suggested very few guests at this table ever did that. Josie noticed. She always noticed the small things he did that the room never saw. It was over the second course, a wild mushroom risotto, that Diane Wyndham, the firm's managing partner, rose with her glass and tapped it gently. "Before we get to dessert," Diane said, "I want to say a few words about the property we're sitting on tonight, because it means more to this firm than most of you know." The table quieted. Josie sat up a little straighter, assuming this was the moment the announcement, early, generous as Diane sometimes was. 3 years ago, Diane continued, this vineyard was on the edge of foreclosure. The family who'd farmed it for 2 generations was drowning in debt after a bad frost wiped out 2 harvests in a row. We represented the bank in that matter. If some of you remember, not our finest hour, ethically, though we did our jobs. A ripple of polite laughter. What most of you don't know is that the vineyard was bought, quietly, by a private buyer who kept the family's foreman on, kept every worker employed through the transition, restructured the debt himself rather than let the bank do it, and has spent 3 years, and I'm told, a great deal of his own money bringing this land back from the edge. He's asked for no recognition. He's never once, in 3 years of us hosting events here, come to a single dinner. Trent, 2 seats down, leaned toward Josie with a smirk. Some tech guy, probably. They love buying land they'll never set foot on. Diane smiled. and there was something in it Josie hadn't seen before. Not warmth exactly, but respect. The particular respect one careful person holds for another. Actually, Diane said, he's here tonight. For the first time. I only found out an hour ago, when I asked the Vineyard's manager where I could reach the owner to invite him personally to next year's dinner, and she told me he was already seated. Diane's eyes moved down the table, past Trent, past two junior associates, and settled. Josie's stomach dropped before her mind caught up on Elias. Elias, Diane said, would you stand up? The table went silent in the particular way a room goes. Silent when it realizes it has been wrong about something all evening and hasn't caught up yet. Elias set down his fork. He didn't rush. He wiped his mouth with his napkin, folded it once, and stood, the tear in his elbow catching the string lights for just a moment as he rose. This is Elias Thorncroft, Diane said to the table, owner of Thorncroft Hill Vineyard, and I'm told, Josephine Farrow's husband. She turned to Josie with something like delight. Josephine, you never mentioned. Josie could not speak. She was staring at her husband's sleeve, at the two mismatched patches she had teased him about that very morning, and trying to reconcile the man who had climbed out of a 15-year-old truck an hour ago with the name carved into the iron gate sheet. Walked past without reading. Trent had gone the color of the tablecloth. Wait, he said. Thorncroft like the Vineyard. Thorncroft Hill. You own this? I do, Elias said. His voice was the same voice he used at their kitchen table. Unhurried, unbothered. Bought it a little over 3 years ago. The Alvarez family had farmed it for 40 years before that. I kept Rosa on as foreman. She runs the place better than I ever could. I mostly stay out of the way. You never said anything, Trent said, and it came out smaller than he meant it to. You never asked, Elias said. Not unkindly. You asked what I do. I told you I work with my hands. Most days that means pruning, or fixing irrigation lines, or hauling crates during harvest. I don't sit behind a desk. I didn't think it needed a longer answer. Diane raised her glass again. I've hosted 11 dinners on this land in 3 years, and never once met the man who saved it. I think that says something about the kind of owner he is. To Elias, and to the people who show up and do the work without needing anyone to notice. Glasses lifted around the table a little unsteadily, a little late. Josie reached for Elias's hand under the table and found it rough and warm. The same hand. It had always been. You could have told me, she whispered, not angry, just full. I didn't buy it to tell anyone, he said quietly. Just for her. I bought it because the Alvarez kids were about to lose the only home they'd ever known, and I had the money sitting there doing nothing useful. Seemed like a better use of it than a bigger truck. Later, as the tables cleared and the string lights swayed in the evening breeze, Rosa Alvarez, the Vineyard's foreman, a woman with silver-streaked hair and hands as weathered as Elias's, found Josie near the edge of the vines. He doesn't like being thanked, Rosa said, without preamble, but somebody should tell you. The year he bought this place, my father was 2 months from losing everything he built. Mr. Thorncroft didn't just buy the land. He sat with my father for 6 hours, going over every debt, every worker's name, every worry my father had. He didn't have to do that. Owners don't usually do that. Josie looked out over the rows of vines, catching the last of the light. He never mentioned any of this. Not once in 3 years. Rosa smiled. That's usually how you know it's real. By the time dessert arrived, a lavender panna cotta that no one at the table quite finished. Too distracted to eat, Diane made her way down to where Josie and Elias sat, and crouched beside Josie's chair. I wasn't going to do this tonight, Diane said, but given the circumstances, I don't see the harm in moving it up. Josephine, the partners voted unanimously last week. You're the newest name on our letterhead. Effective the 1st of the month, she smiled. Though I have a feeling that's not going to be the headline of your evening. Josie laughed. A real laugh, disbelieving, her eyes wet. No, she said, glancing at Elias. I don't think it will be. Trent approached later, when most of the guests had drifted toward the fire pits at the far end of the property, his earlier confidence gone soft and careful. I owe you an apology, he said to Elias, about the jacket. About all of it. Elias looked at him for a moment, not unkindly, and shrugged. It's a good jacket, he said. Just old. Like most things worth keeping. Trent didn't quite know what to do with that, and after a moment, he simply nodded and walked away. Josie and Elias stayed until the very end, until the servers had cleared the last of the tables and the string lights had been switched off one strand at a time, leaving only the moon over the vines and the sound of crickets rising from the dark rows. Elias took off his torn jacket and draped it over Josie's shoulders against the evening chill. The same worn jacket that had embarrassed her 3 hours earlier, now simply the warmest thing within reach. Next year, Josie said, leaning into him. You're coming to every dinner. Only if I can wear the jacket, he said. She laughed into his shoulder. Only if you wear the jacket. Above them, the vines stretched dark and quiet toward the hills. Thousands of them, every single one carrying the weight of a promise a man had made to a family he barely knew. A promise he had never once asked anyone to notice, and never would have, if the room hadn't finally asked the right question.